Hi, I'm Amy Whelan and welcome back to Table Flipping Housewife. Today I want to show you this coffee table that I restored. Before I get into the restoration though, I wanted to let you know that while I was sanding it one day, one word kept coming to mind, and that was lagniappe. Now where I'm from in New Orleans, that's a term we use often to describe something that's extra. This table was extra. Yeah, I learned a lot working on it. But it also has an extra feature. So come hop on over and watch as I work on it. And I'll explain why I think it's a lagniappe table. At first glance, it looks like a regular small dining table, but it does have a lever underneath. And if you flip it, you can push the table down to a coffee table. And then when you're ready, you can lift it back up and lock it back in place. But as you can see, the table has some seams that I'm going to need to fill, and I'll need to fill it with a filler that can accept stain, because my plan is to sand the top, fill in those seams, and then stain the top and paint the base white. But I gave it a good sanding with my Tacklife Sander, and once the sanding was complete, I made sure to remove all of the dust, and I attempted to fill it with the Stainable filler. But the seams were so big and the filler was so thin that it was just pushing right through. I wasn't able to get a good tight fit. So I ended up getting some spackle first, which was thicker. I filled the seams, and as you can see now, I'm using the corner of my tool to scrape out an indentation to leave room for the Stainable filler. So I did that all the way around, let it dry, and sanded it smooth here. I just love this sander. So now that it's dry, I am taking the wood filler and I'm filling the indentation that I left with the spackling. I had no idea if this was going to work or not, and as you can tell in the beginning I was thinking, no, Amy. But it did fill in that little area that I created, and it dried, and I was able to sand it nice and smooth, as you'll see. While it was drying, I took some 220 grit sandpaper and I scuff sanded the base. As you can tell, the surface of the table has a very high gloss sheen to it, and I knew that I was going to apply a primer, but I just wanted to, before the paint, but I just wanted to make sure that I was sanding it so that the primer and the paint would have something to grip to. Now here I'm using the Zinsser Bin Primer Shellac based stain blocker. I find it difficult to use. I'm not a big fan, but I am using a bristle brush. Since it's shellac based, it's not easily cleaned, so I just use a bristle brush that I can easily throw away. I find that it just dries quickly. I don't know, do you guys like it? It's an excellent stain blocker, and so I don't knock that. It's just, it dries quickly. It's hard to paint smoothly. So while that was drying, I went back to the table to sand it, and as you can see, that area I need to continue sanding a little bit better, but it sanded nice and smooth. I was very pleased. So with all the dust removed, I started using Minwax Pre-Stain conditioner. It was a very raw wood at that point, and by the way, I did a final sanding with 220 grit to make it nice and smooth. So I removed all the dust, and now I'm applying this Pre-Stain. So while that's setting, you have to let it set 5 to 15 minutes, and then you're committed to, as I'll state later, to apply the stain within 2 hours. So anyway, here I am mixing up the stain. I'm using a dark walnut, and I want it really, really dark, and I don't know after I'm looking at that whether it's going to be good or not. So here I go, and I'm pretty nervous because I've spent so much time preparing this. I just hope that the stain filler stains as nicely as the rest of the wood. I want a dark stain. This is dark walnut. I'm wondering if it's actually going to be a little too dark, but let's keep going. Ah! Now I'm committed, right? The conditioner's on it. I've wiped off the excess, and now I have to do this within a certain period of time. Here we go. So far so good. It's not as dark as I thought it would be. Of course, I can add additional coats as needed. So I'll keep going. This is exciting. The filler is taking the stain. Of course, it is a little different than the way it looks on the wood. But so far, so good. So while that is drying, I thought I'd go ahead and paint the base. I'm using my Wagner Spraytech Flexio 590. I bought it last year and I love it. You do have to strain the paint through a filter, and here you'll see I'm adding water to it. When you put paint through a sprayer, you typically have to water it down a little bit. Usually it's maybe a tenth of the content needs to be water and the other 9/10 of it need to be paint. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but it's a splash of water. And then you have to mix it thoroughly in the hopper before you put the whole gun together. I knew that my spray gun would be leaning down, and so I made sure that that little device that actually reaches into the paint was pointing toward the front of the hopper. So here I go. Now, you're probably wondering, Amy, you just stained the top. Shouldn't you have the top covered? Well, remember in the beginning of the video I told you I learned quite a bit? Well, here I learned that even though I'm spray painting under the table, I should have covered the top, because as I let go of the lever of the paint sprayer and stood up, like right there, little spits of paint, guess what? They ended up on the tabletop. I couldn't believe it. So I had to go back and fix that. But nonetheless, here I am spraying the base of the table. This electric sprayer, see, there it is. I'm sure I spit on top of the wood at that point too. It's a great, affordable way to start spray painting if you don't have a bigger budget for a pneumatic system. You just have to get kind of you have to use trial and error. If you have a scrap piece of wood or something, you can practice your paint flow and the output speed on a scrap piece of wood before you actually start painting your piece of furniture. There is a period where you'll have to get used to it, but in the end, it is a lovely device. It makes painting go so smoothly and so quickly. I love it. So I ended up giving 2 coats of paint to the bottom and waited a good 72 hours at the top for the top to dry, the stain, before I brought it indoors to work further on it. Now you'll notice here that my table had these really cool adjustable risers, levelers rather, but those little plastic pieces had broken on some of them, so I just removed those plastic pieces and I glued these little super sliders onto the metal hardware that remained with the E6000 glue. And I let that dry a good 24 hours before I turn the table back over. But this is great. I love these levelers. You turn them, so if you have an uneven surface, you can adjust it so that the table's level. Now the next thing that I did was I wanted to distress the base of the table before I sealed it. So I used 150 grit sandpaper wrapped around a sanding block, and I lightly sanded along the edges where you would typically get wear and tear on furniture. Now, when I first started painting furniture, I really did over distress. It just didn't look natural. So you'll notice, you'll probably be thinking, I don't see what she's doing. And it's because I just had a very light touch, and then eventually I kind of got into the groove of it. In a moment, you'll see where the paint is starting to sand down to the dark original wood color. Now, typically, if this was a blonde wood, then I would have had to paint those edges black before I painted the furniture white, so that when I distressed, I would stress down to that dark paint. But since, as you know, you saw earlier, since the table was a very dark wood, that way, when I distress, I'm just distressing down to that original dark wood, and that's how the distressing looks natural. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well. So you'll be able to tell here better as I'm sanding. I am sanding down, and you'll see the darker color underneath. It's just a very natural look. And I love the way that these little areas of detail distress like that. I think it's really pretty. Now, the paint that I used is flat based. I prefer that because I find that distressing with sandpaper like this is much easier to do when your paint does not have a sheen to it like a satin or a semi-gloss. When it's flat paint like this, it's easy to distress. However, you have to seal it. I'm trying something again. I'm going to try to apply the sealant with this foam brush. In the past, I have not had good luck because I feel like the foam starts to break down and get black flecks on what I'm sealing. But since this is a stained top and I'm not doing the white base yet, I thought I would give the foam brush a try. What I really wanted to do was use my Wagner sprayer to apply the sealant. I've never done that before, and I wanted to give it a try, but the weather here in Georgia is pretty bad right now. It's spitting rain, and our pollen is starting. Ugh, hate it. Oh, now see, I did something I shouldn't have done. I went over an area I had already smoothed out, so let me smooth that out again. The pine pollen in Georgia is terrible. It coats everything in yellow. It's disgusting, and I knew that if I attempted to seal the table outside, it would just end up getting pollen in it. So I'm doing this indoors in our basement, which isn't ideal. So here I am painting it on with a brush. Probably doing a terrible job, but I'm learning. I know you're supposed to smooth it out and then not touch it to let it blend, but it's a round table, so how do I do that? How do I cover it and do long strokes when it's round? It's so much easier to do that when you can go from one straight side to the next, isn't it? So here's my attempt. Alright. And after I do this, I'm going to go around the edge to make sure there are no drips. I am going to switch to the Trylon bristle brush, synthetic bristle brush for the base. One reason is because I knew I'd have to switch brushes anyway, since the foam brush I was using might have already picked up some stain. I didn't want to transfer that onto the base. But also, I just don't like foam brushes. It was already, the brush itself was already falling apart. So, I'm switching to this. That looks good. I'm pleased. Yay. Okay.